Yeah, I've done a lot of different work over the years, books, different materials to help people as I've gone through my journey. I'm one among you guys. I don't claim to have special knowledge, and I didn't like read every book in existence to get to where I am. I did a lot of introspection, right? A lot of that internal work, which from like the Taoist arts, they would call it inner alchemy. And there's a lot of people who are reaching out to me from those communities too. So it's really nice to see how it's all being interwoven. You have people who like to grow food, people who care about freedom from a spiritual, moral, psychological perspective. And then you have people who talk about natural medicine, whether it's naturopaths or holistic practitioners of any kind. I'm an integrative nutrition health coach. So I came from a nutrition background, originally a very much health based background. But I think it was sort of inevitable for me to see the value in freedom. So that's sort of my journey in short is I started in health and then I sort of shifted my priorities to freedom. But to me, it's still about health, right? It always was about health. It's just that I'm not just looking now at the individual level, I'm looking at the collective. And so I know that I've talked to Dr. Karen here about some of the ideas, one for which is how to speak to people about these ideas without getting them triggered per se or off put. And this is something that I've long practiced with since I actively go outside my bubble to join or just basically talk to people who totally disagree with me or totally are on the opposite side of things, right? And I feel like I can resonate with anybody, because I open my heart to them. I like to listen to them. Not that they would necessarily do the same for me, but I can definitely share different strategies that have helped me, that I find to be rather useful, and also knowledge that I find to be rather root targeting when it comes to the disease that is our world and why we're not free. So I actually have a whole health project as well, related to this. And I would actually invite anybody on here who knows about the psychological aspects of humanity to join that project too, or just review a lot of our notes. Cause I actually have a team of medical professionals who like left the system, who are like talking about a lot of this stuff. And we've been working on this research material for the past year. So anybody is welcome to join that, including you, Dr. Karen. You're always
That's
welcome.
beautiful, Corey. I got to meet your friend Stephanie,
Oh,
and she
really?
was absolutely
Okay.
delightful. We had a great chat. Now she wants me to meet her partner in her project, Dr. Ruby, which I haven't got the
Awesome.
pleasure of meeting yet. And she's a medical doctor, Western trained, like I am, right? And then Stephanie is the experiencer, somebody
Yes.
that's probably by all stretch of the imagination should be dead, right? With having like double transplants and all that kind of stuff, but
Oh,
she's living
yeah.
and thriving. It's like, how does somebody do that, right? So
She's
that was
amazing.
really fascinating.
Yeah, she's amazing. She's actually part of that health project that I'm talking about. And then there's two other people. And one of them is actually an ex-Scientologist. He can't come to this area where I am in Florida because, this is the headquarters to Scientology, Clearwater, Florida. So
Oh,
they actually have him like on a list. He was very high up in Scientology before he left, so that he's a targeted individual. Uh,
wow. A
yeah.
list. Like, what do you mean a list? Like a target list, like a rest list?
Well, they
Like,
know who he is, and
oh,
he's got to be
geez.
very careful, this to say the
Wow.
least. Yeah, because it's a
That's a
bit of a
cult, right?
cult, right? um, and so he left that. But see, Scientology, he's teaching the roots to Scientology, the aspects to it that he saw were perverted and taken for money and turned into a cult. Because originally, and the reason why people follow it is to provide an alternative to psychiatry. And so he
Ah,
talks about its methods and he shares it publicly for free. He puts it all on his website and stuff like that. So he's trying to now basically whistleblow and get the message out there and share it with everybody instead of it having been hidden within church. So he's not
mm,
afraid. And that's what I find amazing. So he's sharing his, medical side of things to us and he's sharing resources we've never, come across. It's amazing. And he shares that they have all
wow.
sorts of technologies we don't know about. So he's a really fascinating guy. I can connect you with him too. But see, I'm meeting these people just by opening up my outreach and my horizons, right? I'm open to see what happens. I got into a lot of these communities as well through Mark Passio. And I don't know if any of you guys know who he is,
I
but
know the
he's a spiritual
name.
teacher. Yeah, he's a spiritual
Yeah,
teacher
Adele might
online.
know it.
He doesn't
Mark,
write books,
yeah,
but he
no?
does like presentations.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can link his channel in the chat if that makes it easier. I could just link whatever. Like if I say something, I'll just link it. It won't take me long to just
Yeah,
like
or
pull it
Leslie
up.
can find it for you.
But but yeah, he is amazing. Some of his presentations are like almost 10 hours long, very in detail. So he tracks a lot of people like us who are spiritual and also like to look at things kind of deeply and look at like the ins and outs. And so he talks about like left brain versus right brain, masculine versus feminine, hermetic principles, universal laws. He's known for his work, natural law. That's my favorite work from him as well. And so I'll link that.
Yeah, I'm actually doing the Sovereign's Way, some of the private
Okay.
life stuff with Greg Paul
Yes.
that was on Alex Zek's show, and I'm really in enjoying it because it's a lot of what we talk about in terms of being,
Right.
that stillness and peace within. And yeah, there's sometimes underworld stuff that we have to deal with,
Yeah.
our own subconscious, our beliefs, our attachments to getting approval, that
My
kind of
cat.
stuff. And so yeah, I'm really enjoying that. Have an accountability partner, and we meet every Sunday for 2 hours just to study that. Because I just, before I was just like, oh, well, if taxes are not actually legal, then I'm just going to stop paying taxes, right? But
Right.
Greg Paul doesn't say it that way. He says, look, everything's contract based.
Hmm.
So at some point, there was a contract that, or an agreement that you were paying taxes if you are in this system and you gave them your social security number and you use these tools and these systems, then actually self responsibility is like, okay, you pay your taxes, like you chose that route. But if you're
Yes.
choosing the private life and you're doing transactionals privately here outside the system, there's a way in which to do that. But you still need to be peaceful within. Because
Yeah.
the minute you start battling, you're attracting the battle to you.
Yes.
And I totally agree with them. So,
And it could get very material based, right? When you start talking about paperwork and all of these concepts, it can feel like, oh man, we're not now
right.
operating from this heart space, where
Yes.
it's more of that personal connection. So, and I saw that to be a big problem when I connected with those communities. And when I say those communities, I mean people who teach, I usually kind of categorize them as the common law assemblies or
Yes.
American common law teachers, and I respect them absolutely for their knowledge. But we have to be careful of our own shadow, right? Our own
Yes.
unconscious per se. And so I always try to bring new ideas to the table to any group I go to. Like even if it's a spiritual group that doesn't talk about the problems of the world, I mention, hey, why aren't we looking at the problems of the world, right? Because there's the new age type of spiritual teachings where it's like only look at the positive and don't look at the negative. And that
Yeah.
can be a
Yeah.
problem too.
Yep.
So yeah, just yesterday I was at a Christian group and I'm not a Christian, right? But I go to this one group at a church near my house, and they're all like young people like me, so I hang out with them, and they're very cool and very open. They're not like judgmental or pushy. But I can see a lot of different things that go on in their mind and why they say what they say, and it's very interesting to me coming from like a more outside point of view, right? Where I've studied many other things too. And I'm only curious if they are interested in learning from me, not just telling me, what I should know, right? And that's kind of like what I want to bring home to you guys here is instead of me telling you what to think, I will share with you information. Think about it as you will for yourself, right? Of course, needless to say, but it's important to say because there's a lot of people who will just take words of people and accept them as truth. What I want to share with you is very important in my eyes. Like for instance, the Sovereign's Way and a lot of these groups don't share a lot of the information that I share regarding what I see to be the root cause problem in the world. So for this type of group, like a health freedom group, what is that root problem? Right? Karen, do you want me to go into it a little bit?
Yeah, sure. That would be great. That'd be great. I think that just to echo some of the things you were talking about, the assemblies and like the natural law and that kind of thing is a lot of the energy behind it is still battling, and
Yes.
we're literally battling our own shadow, and so
Yes.
we keep attracting. There was a lot of Canadians actually that were on the Q&A and it's a recording of the private life stuff. And Greg Paul was just, just pointing out to them that they're scared of this happening or digital, IDs coming in Canada and all this kind of stuff. And he says, well, you're in fear. And they're like, well, no, I'm not. but right,
Yeah.
but they weren't aware. He's like, is it happening to you right now? Well, no, right? So there
Yeah.
was this energy of trying to prevent something, trying to fix something, trying to prevent their friend from something, and it was very, very interesting because I have a question for him, which is like, how do you stand up for what you believe in and also not be battling and also not
Mhm.
battling other people's
Yeah, so
battles?
that's big. Okay, so I would say there's two parts to this, right? It's knowing the problem and then knowing how to share that problem with those who are engaging in the problem, maybe unconscious of the problem, etc. So to me, I consider them two separate things, although they're interwoven and connected. Okay, because like to me, action and knowledge, of course, they're both one and the same because I think education is very important. It's a word that the abolitionists called it in 19th century. They called it moral suasion. And they saw that it would
Mm.
be more important than any other form of change in the world because it affects the hearts and minds or the conscience of individuals. They said you can't end slavery after thousands of years by just writing on a piece of paper and saying it's illegal. You can't just end it by passing a new law or changing the politician. You have to actually talk to your fellow man, and that was a hard thing to do because everybody was saying, well, it's necessary for the economy that we have slaves and that, this has been done for
Mm.
so long. It's okay. They made all these justifications. They were battling the world. They were getting censored. They were getting attacked, just like people nowadays do, right? When they share new information. So when I learn about the abolitionists and what they did, I usually look at them as a model for action. But aside from that, they also looked at this root cause I'm talking about. And despite being very Christian or religious people, a lot of them might say were actually spiritual. They were going through a lot of things at the time. Like when you open up your eyes to one thing, as you guys might know, you start seeing a bunch of other things. So a lot of them were becoming vegetarian. They were becoming obsessed about octagon houses because that was a trend at the time.
I
They
still
were
love
building
those.
they were building their own towns through the Underground Railroad. So they were doing a bunch of things, okay, to really help like embody their message. They weren't just saying it, they were doing it. And that's why I find it so fascinating. Historians completely ignore a lot of things that I found out about their works. I even had to go to the back of some libraries to get their works because although they were public works, they were hidden from the public in the back of some university or college. So I was up north in Pennsylvania. That's where I used to live. And so I had the fortunate ability to go an hour or 2 hours out of my way to some of these colleges that had the newspapers. And I found amazing material in these guys' works. Um, really shocking material that people would not admit to. So, what is it that I'm trying to get to? There's a belief system called statism, which is that which creates the state. Now, if you never heard of this actual belief system, it's not a political type of like philosophy. It's a psychological condition that can be related to toxic narcissism. It can be related to a lot of different conditions that we've identified, like in this medical project that I'm doing, which is focused around this. But I'm just going to try to keep it in like common sense words for here. And if you guys want the more medical perspective, that's what that product project is for. Okay. So statism is the belief in authority. Okay. The belief that somebody has the right to rule more specifically. So we acknowledge like Dr. Karen, like she's a leader, somebody we would willingly follow voluntarily. But she's not claiming to be an authority figure with the right to rule, with special rights over us, and therefore can pass laws and violently make us comply against our own will. So it's a voluntary relationship. So that's why I would differentiate leaders versus authority. Authority implies the right to rule. Okay, and this has been kept for many thousands of years, this right to rule concept. You see it in kings and queens most notoriously, right? And then our founding fathers in America said, no, you don't have the right to rule, kings and queens. This is nonsense. And so they created their own type of system. Okay, and as we move forward in humanity, what I'm seeing is this evolution to realizing, wait, if we say we're equal, we say we're all human beings, and we all have the same natural rights. What's going on here? Why are we giving certain people special rights to do things that ourselves don't have the right to do? So, what happens is there's a contradiction in morality. And you see this most notoriously in those who are willing statists. I don't like to identify, I don't like to throw labels on people, but I was once a statist, so I can say this and I can say, hey, I was once one of them. Okay. And I'm sure a lot of you guys could say the same thing. Okay. So I was heavily indoctrinated into the system. The school system is based on the Prussian schooling model, which teaches you obedience, not morality. It teaches you obedience as morality. Okay. So when an order follower, somebody who turns off their conscience and doesn't think for themselves, basically do what the person giving the order tells them to do. They're shutting off their brain, their morals, and they're following the whim or the opinion of the person in power. And so, are they following morality or are they following the whims of some people, if they totally turn off their conscience? And so, there's a lot of manipulation that can take place where even the politician can convince someone and say, well, you're doing it for the greater good. You're doing it and you made the decision yourself. But in reality, they didn't. And this is where it gets very manipulative. You can look at abusive relationships, you can look at, healthy relationships and setting boundaries. And you can kind of relate this to this notion. You can even look at addictions and how people talk about politics and they're obsessed about talking about these different things and they say, man, my side is right, the left or the right or libertarian or whatever it is, and they get so stuck on their identity and they get so attached and they get so defensive, and then you try to bring something up to them and they get really angry. It's because we have this deep psychological conviction in what we think to be true, and we don't realize that every proceeding in politics is backed by violence. So whatever we want to be true imposed upon everybody else through the rule of law, we're essentially saying we want our fellow man to be coerced against his will. And that hidden violence is what makes it so dangerous because we will say something's taxation when in reality it's no different from theft. It's the same action being taken. Somebody's money is being taken against their will. So somebody can make any justification and say, well, it's for this benefit, it's for that greater good, and without taxation, therefore we won't have that. But then they still ignore in that justification the fact that it's taking money that doesn't belong to you. And that ignorance right there of such a simple morality that you yourself wouldn't do. You wouldn't go to your neighbor and take his money. You would hire someone else through law and government to take their money for you. That's even more hypocritical. So it's quite insane how most people, I'm talking 99% of the population in the world, is perfectly okay with that and never ever address the morality of that scenario. And then you wonder why we are where we are and feeling as confused as we are. It's because of order following. So, order following is the root cause to all evil. And statism is just that belief system that takes place in the order follower that says, okay, I must do anything that I'm told because he's an authority figure. Okay, so that's the summary of what Larkin Rose calls the most dangerous superstition, what Jeremy Locke calls the end of all evil, what Mark Passio calls the one great divide. And very few individuals are talking about it currently, although it's increasing in its popularity of understanding. And the reason why a lot of people don't talk about it is because it's also not profitable. Because it's much more profitable to talk about politics and talk about left versus right and play the game that everybody's used to and say the things that people are comfortable with because it's very uncomfortable to say that you yourself are part of the problem. It's much more comfortable to say someone else is the problem and point the finger and say we need to change the person in power, change the laws. It's not me. I wasn't responsible for taking this action to hurt somebody. I just was doing what I was told. And this is every proceeding in government is, oh, I was just doing what I was told. Oh, I'm just doing part of the system. Oh, I'm just doing it because it's for the greater good. Totally no individual responsibility or sovereignty on part of like the self. So if you have to have a concept of the self or any concept of self-ownership or any concept of sovereignty and natural rights, it will help you understand this inevitable realization that you are not bound to anybody. And that's what happened to the abolitionists when they understood, wait, slavery is wrong. They started challenging human governments. And that's exactly what they said. They said God's government is above human government. And therefore, we owe allegiance to something higher. We owe allegiance to something not of this world, right?
Wow.
It's a very unique position. And I don't know how many Christians today would share that position. It's very, very rare.
I love everything that you said, and I used to be that too, where, the most obedient Probably the most obedient person I knew. That would be me. It was like get good grades, do this, do that, and I mean, I was very, like religious when I was younger, and just felt that to be obedient was to be moral. And I didn't. I mean, of course, I wouldn't do something that was immoral because as a kid, I mean, we weren't often, asked to do those kinds of things. But I got
Right.
into that habit of just being obedient. I was
See,
probably the most. That's why I was teacher's pet because she said shut up and I would shut up.
yeah. Well, it's interesting, right? Because you mentioned it's like we know what is moral, we know what is right and wrong. Most people know it's wrong to harm another person. So it's weird. We have this superstition in the back of our brain as saying, wait, it's okay if an authority tells us to do something that is wrong. And that
Oh,
superstition has cost way too many lives throughout human history. You're talking millions in World War II alone, where millions of people followed one person, put him on a pedestal. Oh, because they're wearing a certain piece of clothing because they write down on a fancy piece of paper, and we worship these as
and
if
they're on
they
the
are.
pulpit,
Yes.
right?
So
Yeah.
if
Well,
for any
this is.
spiritual freedom talk, I would imagine this should be the center piece of conversation. Like people are talking about, in Christianity, I hear this common concern of like, we need to bring Christ's kingdom to earth and we need to do what he wants. But then it's like at the same time, here they're worshiping this man-made system and they don't ever criticize it to the
Mhm.
level that I'm talking about. They only criticize it to an extent and they still believe in that superstition of authority. And therefore they undermine the authority of God or what they claim to serve. And they contradict their own morals, the golden rule. Because again, like I said, they're not going to go to their neighbor and steal their money directly. They're going to pay someone else to do it for them. And by the way, that's like a never-ending loop of passive income for those in power. What happens is they, literally hire somebody with the money they stole from you so they can steal more money from you. And then it's just
Yep.
a never-ending loop of they get your money and they can waste it basically. Because what happens if you're not paying for a service that you directly want, there's going to be middlemen in the way that are wasting that product. In addition, when you have lawmakers who are going to be lobbied by corporations and people who do make money, um, it's going to create monopolies because now those corporations can get in those seats of power or influence those lawmakers and they can stop other corporations from being created. And therefore, you don't actually have a free market. You don't actually
Mm.
have products or solutions coming to the top. So then it's like, no wonder why natural medicine can't get out. Well, look at what happens to all the people who do share natural medicine. The feds come in and they start destroying all their stuff or taking their property. The government has been the root cause to this evil for pretty much everything. And nobody wants to admit to that. Everybody wants to say it's a certain part of the government, it's a certain law, it's a certain person, but they don't want to admit it's the actual, quite literal foundation to all of it. And that is this dangerous superstition that lives in all of our minds. Our
Yeah.
minds
So
create this
it's
reality.
like it's kind of permeated into the fabric, of that collective
Yes.
unconscious, right? So we all, even if we don't ascribe to it now, we all have a piece energetically of this thing, and it's almost like a machine in and of itself. It's energetic, but it just keeps going. And it's funny because Corey, when you were talking about who's going to do God's law, yeah, that was one of the things I had with my dad, right? Because he was quite upset that I declined, refused, whatever you want to call it, to mask and vax and all that kind of stuff,
Mm.
and therefore could not come visit to Canada and take care of them or whatever it is. I'm thinking you have two other children, but anyway, um, and uh, literally it came down to finally, me saying, I'm following God's law, not man's law. That's exactly what I had to say. And he goes, well, I guess there's no, uh, you know, that's the end of this conversation.
Yeah, it starts to when you start showing people like, hey, I'm growing my own food, we're creating better systems that are voluntary. I stand for God, I stand for truth and not, this man-made authority, this person who proclaims to rule over me. It starts to be where people have a hard time, having to be trying to argue with you. They're going to do everything they can to make all sorts of different justifications. But if you come at them from a very peaceful position,
Mm,
and you're sharing these solutions, they're going to be irresistible for a lot of people who are heading in this direction. Like,
So like being the change you wish to see without necessarily
yes,
shaking people, because people, I mean, I still see some of the, people that I follow, like Jamie Salé in Canada, Theo Fleury, like these are really, really famous athletes, right? Really saying, hey, the time for peaceful awakening is done. Now it's time for like shaking people awake. And I'm saying it doesn't really actually work that way. I mean, not in my
no,
experience, but what you're saying is like
no,
be the change, be the one that
yes.
growing food, doing different things, be the healthy one. Right, be the
Well,
one that
yes.
yeah.
I've talked to people, and it's like I've never met somebody who their partner, their friend lectured them for 2 hours and then boom, they were awake. I never met someone like that. And it's a funny thing, but like Larkin Rose says the same thing, and he teaches people how to like talk to people about, their own shadow and dealing with this type of thing. And so I can link his thing on the chat soon as well. But because he has a whole course about this, but and it's really deep. But
Mm,
what was I going to say? So people have like their attachment, right, to their worldview. And so, how do you get people out of that attachment, right? You can come at it from an Eastern medicine point of view and say, "Oh, look at this attachment, look at this identity that you've thrown in yourself." And that's why I kind of got into Taoism, but also not to mention, but Taoism is the first ever like freedom philosophy on earth. It was really honestly the first philosophy that we can kind of find in ancient history that challenges the foundations to government that I'm talking about. In the
ooh,
text, it says if everybody followed the Tao, there'd be no need for government.
right.
So it's a very, very radical text, and which is why the Chinese government tries to keep it kind of suppressed, and they barely recognize it as a religion in China. They don't want it to grow, and they actually destroyed millions of monks and their temples and texts in the 1960s when the government officially declared to be atheist. So there's a
Wow.
plenty of material that has probably been lost from both Buddhism, Hinduism, and Taoism in particular, which is unfortunate, right? Because there's probably a lot of material that could have been really amazing. A lot of the Taoist writers that I've studied from ancient times talked about how there was a time in China where it was all agricultural, farmland, peaceful. No one talked about politics. There was no such thing. There was no such thing as having to worry about power and greed because those ideas were not introduced. And
Mm,
once they were starting to be introduced and people were fighting over those things, all of a sudden the world became very tyrannical, in part because you had Confucius's ideas get popular. So Confucianism is kind of like Christianity or kind of like libertarianism, if you will, where it's like we want morals, we want good people, but we still acknowledge that there's like this higher authority in man over their fellow man. And the Taoists did not like that. They said, if you just learn to let go and allow things to work spontaneously, order will manifest itself. And the Confucius thought did not really understand that. They're like, we
right.
need to control things. We need to pass
Yep.
laws to
Yep.
make people good. People are not
Yep.
inherently good. Same
Oh,
things as the Christians
we
would
hear that
say,
argument
we're,
all the time.
yeah, Christians say we're full of sin. We need to do all this and do that to make ourselves good. And it's the same argument in Western medicine where you say, okay, there's this baby coming out of the womb and we need to give them like 90 different vaccines. Right at this point, it's like tripled since the last 20 years. And so, I mean, that's the same mindset. It's like, we're
Yep.
not perfect. We're not good. Nature is not good. And
Yep.
therefore, we need to fix nature. And so we're going
Yep.
against nature. And the Taoists were like, this is insane because nature to them is just is. It's truth, right? It's not good or evil. It's kind of like amoral, but it's good when you learn to work with it. And that's what they called virtue, right? So people will say
Mm,
there is no moral standard in Taoism. Well, technically there is because if you get to the uncarved block, as they say, it's like the simplistic, natural, original state then you basically are in alignment with De or Te or De, which stands for virtue in Chinese. So,
oh yeah.
so that's their concept of virtue is actually just returning to who you're meant to be, not any like
Yep.
specific moral framework. It's very unique, and
And that
many
moral framework
philosophers have not
is
said that.
fear based. right? Like, Christianity and the rules, and
Yes, it needs to be a
it's
certain
okay
way.
to inject ourselves with, aborted fetal cells or whatever, because the bishop said it was okay.
Yes. Yeah,
So
it's
I'm not
always
gonna
this
think for
type
myself.
of confined.
Yeah. Well, my husband actually posted something on Facebook, which I was like, I can't believe you're posting that. But anyway, it basically said, when we really, can't remember what he said. Hey, honey, can you can you share about what you shared about the Ten Commandments? Yeah, yeah, he'll come here, and yeah, we got some flack from a religious person. Let's put it that way.
Basically, that if we were all embodying, how did you say it, honey? He's here. Okay, here.
Oh, love transcends and eliminates the need for the Ten Commandments.
Yeah. Can you hear him?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, once you find and discover that love, it's like that love, you will never find any need for the Ten Commandments, because the need for the Ten Commandments would never be in existence of that space. So that's kind of like what we're trying to do, is draw all these individuals up into that and get out of the thumb of something that you're not going to get in trouble for. It's just basically finding what you truly are, which is that love. And the Ten Commandments, just basically, you'll find there's nothing that you're doing. You're not killing. You're not freaking stealing.
You don't want to.
No, there's no need. I mean, that's not in
Yes.
your mindset at all, because you found a type of love, a type of awareness that you truly are. And who you're truly not is that area that where the Ten Commandments are necessary, because eventually we grow up in this world where the Ten Commandments kind of are a necessary thing to keep us a little bit in straight.
Sure.
But after you wake up and find out who you truly are, the love starts to flow, and then it becomes an unnecessary thing to have anymore. Now you can start growing from who you truly are and no longer be burdened by these other things. So at least
That's very true.
Yeah.
that's what I've discovered in my journey. So
Yeah, I totally agree with them. I said that, if we were all embodying love, I mean, that's part of, how
Yes.
everything is created, that we don't need the Ten Commandments, right? But oh my goodness, some religious people did not like that. Did
Yeah,
not like.
so yeah, I want to go over some of the comments in the chat,
Yes,
and I
please.
want to kind of go into that a little bit before I go into the comments. Love is everything to do with this. Tolerance, especially like true tolerance, not this type of like, oh, let's just tolerate everybody type of mindset, but still could give an exception in the case of authority, which is again, a lot of people probably more on the left side of things, right? They're like, let's tolerate everybody except authority, and then everybody on the right leaning side is all these darn leftists, they're all too tolerable, and we need to stop tolerating certain types of people and like go back to our traditional values and stay in the past. So it's like you have both worldviews and they're not good. And then the libertarians just like, we just want a lesser form of that, but it's not like a complete
Mm.
eradication of it. So so basically, how do you get out of this mess, right? The abolitionists, they called themselves immediatist. They didn't call themselves gradualist. If they were the libertarian type of mindset, they would be a gradualist. And what that means is let's just make the condition better. Let's just make it slavery. Let's just make it better. Let's move the slave to a better plantation, get them a better master. If we can just lessen their condition of slavery, well, then eventually it will go away, right? So they didn't have that mindset. That also made them quite controversial. They said slavery is wrong, end it now. And so people are like, "Wait, what do you mean end it now? We can't just end it now. What are you talking about?" They didn't.
The
People who made
world
those,
will crumble. Right.
right? Yeah, exactly. So, they knew obviously when they say now, it doesn't mean actually like it's just gonna happen. Boom, it's done. But what they mean is like stand on principle. Like if there's a slave master and there's a slave, the slave says, "Hey, I'm free. I'm free." It's not like, "Oh, I'm free 90%, but the other 10% of me, the slave master owns." It's like, "I own this chair 90%, but the 10% of this chair so like we don't say that, right? So it doesn't make much sense. It's either you own yourself or you don't. You're free or you're
Mm.
not. And we create these weird exceptions in our head to say, like, well, it can be some sort of arbitrary line. And that's the thing. The system is all arbitrary. So if we have true love and compassion, it's okay that everybody has their own opinions, their own worldviews, but we respect that of others and we don't impose our worldview on them. So it's literally the embodiment of love. to say that you want a voluntary world, a world of voluntary interaction where there isn't coercion used against people's will. It's literally love and tolerance. I mean, tell me if it's not, but that's not an abusive relationship and telling people what to do. It's respecting personal boundaries, allowing people to live their life as they please. It's respecting self-ownership. So this is like, to me, I had no choice but to focus on this from the health background because nobody in the health background was talking about it, and barely anyone in the political background was talking about it. And yet, it has everything to do with our psyche and the way we think. And Carl Jung, in his last book, The Undiscovered Self, talks about this as well. He calls the state, he calls it state doctrine. So he doesn't call it statism, but state doctrine, pretty much the same thing, right? And he has different ways of saying that it's like groupthink and that eventually, no matter what government you have, whether it's limited or whatever, it always turns into oligarchy. This is what he said. And he says
Mm.
that it's state slavery. He used those words in particular. He said the state becomes your God and that it even takes the role of the parental figure. So
Oh
like the
yeah.
mother is like that leftist type of mindset of like, oh, I'll be the caregiver and give you all the benefits and all these things. Whereas the right winger is more of like that masculine male archetype, which is to say, like, I'm going to protect you. I'm just going to protect your rights. And so this type of archetype is being projected onto society, right? The shadow is projecting, and we're feeding this type of loop to other people. It's so fascinating. It's amazing once you actually get into it. So how do we get out of it? We need to come from a position of love, yes. And we got to be careful not to do that because it's very easy to say you've been lied to, you're wrong, everything you know is a lie, and whatever you might draw people away just by sharing ideas that are different from what they have. It's called cognitive dissonance,
Yeah.
right? There's a mental blockade, and there's this contrary information, and there's this type of thing, that like barrier that you have to get through. And so how do you get through that barrier? The Socratic method is probably the best method that I've come across. Now you can tell me if you guys know of a better method, but the Socratic method is asking questions. Okay. And I feel like we people who are very passionate, anybody in the freedom community, we don't do this enough. We want to tell other people what to think, or we want to share with them a bunch of information. We want to throw like a bunch of documents their way and be like hoping that they'll read it, a bunch of videos. But maybe we want to learn from them and actually find out where they are at. And the same thing a natural practitioner would do, would they not, if they were to ask their patient or their client, like, how are you feeling today? What makes you in this condition? And without bias, without judgment, the practitioner is there to help them, right? So can we do the same thing when we talk to people about freedom? Because to me, it's the same thing. You come from at it from where they currently are. Now, you don't preconceive of where they are. You don't say, "Oh, well, you believe this, and therefore you believe that." Like it would be easy for me to say, "Oh, well, you're left leaning or right leaning. Well, you're supporting violence because you're supporting the belief in authority or government." They're not going to understand a single thing I'm saying, and they're just going to get triggered and be like, "What do you mean? I'm not supporting violence. I want to protect our rights, or I want to do this, right?" And so they're not going to understand that. But if you come at it from a position of questions, over time they can come to that conclusion on their own if it's the truth, just as the body would heal itself if you allow it to. And that's again like working with the spontaneous order natural in the universe that the Taoists were looking at. They were saying, hey, nature self-organizes itself. Everything in nature organizes itself without any thinking or planning. You just have to learn how to let it happen. And so how could we then just become the facilitators, the coaches, and just allow people to get to the truth on their own without effort? And that is something that I've been, obviously it's a process. It's still a mastery that you have to achieve over time for it to become effortless, but it's something that I definitely have noticed works. And I've had people who will come up to me after just asking them questions or just making observations in a very non-invasive way, and they will be the one curious, wanting to learn more. Rather
Huh.
than me trying to get it out of them and try to pull them out, like, you got to learn this. Over time, they're like, I want to learn this. And their own inquisitive, like, I want to learn about it, is the real thing that wakes people up. Because if you ask people, what is the thing that woke you up? They watched some video, they did a lot of research, they had some life experience, some major breakthrough. Something needs to happen in someone's life that's that aha moment, per se, that really gets things going. And it's not going to be you lecturing to them, but you could definitely plant a seed that can help them in their progression. Because again, what I share, like the knowledge that I share with you guys, is something that isn't shared with anybody to be an option. So, like in natural medicine, the option for acupuncture, for most people, they probably never even heard of it or what it is or where to find it. So, it's not even on their list of options. But at least you being there, you're an option by simply being there. So, like,
Mm.
first things first is presence. When I was with my family, they didn't understand any of this stuff. Okay. When I came to this understanding myself. Okay. And I was 16, 18 years old. Okay. Now they taught me with basic morals. They taught me with everything I'd say was like a very nice moral foundation. I think that made me who I am. Even though I was trained and very much obedient into authority at the same time, I held two very contradictory beliefs, but did not realize it. Okay. So when I sat down with myself and asked myself those questions, I started saying, okay, I am contradicting myself. And how come other people are not seeing this within themselves? So, just me being there with my family over the span of years, naturally, I don't have to really say anything. Now they actually are speaking my language for me. I can just sit back and they're like, they're better than me because I was just there. And that's like first and foremost, don't give up on somebody. Don't just say, oh, well, there's no hope and they're never going to learn. And a lot of people have that mentality too in the truth community is like, well, there's no hope and no one's going to listen. But like, there's plenty of people who have woke up due to 9/11 or COVID or 2008, the market crash or whatever it is. And so there's always just that moment that gets them to realize something. But then they have to go somewhere to learn more. And that's where you come in. That's where, these other resources come in. But
Mm.
until that aha moment happens, it's not going to trigger that series of events. And when it comes
Awesome.
to examples, I kind of gave like three different world examples that happen, but I would say
Okay.
there's probably like individual examples that happen. Like Jim Gale had a spiritual experience after being a billionaire and then going broke several times. And that's when he finally was open to a lot of freedom ideas and started
Mm.
sharing a lot of this stuff. Same thing happened with Mark Passio. He actually grew up major Catholic, went down a very dark path, became a Satanist, left the Church of Satan, and started exposing a lot of what they were sharing. Right, that's why he's a big content creator now online because he's sharing what they taught him and saying like, hey, this is why they control the world essentially. um,
Oh, got
yeah, so he's amazing. And he was from Pennsylvania too, so I've met him in person. These people are all very, I'd say, authentic, on the mission. They have different approaches. Like Mark can be a lot of people can be offset to his approach because he comes out with a lot of anger and passion, passio passion. And so yeah, we say that about his last name, Passio. All you have to do is add an N at the end. It's passion. He's very passionate, but that can draw some people away because, he's very angry sometimes and he likes to express that. But
Mm.
hey, that's why you're here. If you see somebody's doing something wrong and needs to better approach, you can do it better. Rather than complaining about, hey, you're not doing it better and your videos are not as good and you're going to talk about this and you got to talk more about that. Do it yourself.
Mm.
And if you
Yeah,
want, I can
thank
help you.
you. So true. Do it yourself.
um, I'm just saying. So let's look at some of these comments. The truth may set us free, but first it makes us mad. Yeah, I used to believe that taxes were justified as a way to demonstrate our faith in unity. Once it was evident that natural law was being disregarded, that belief changed. Yeah, yeah, again, justifications for evil. This is the biggest thing is it's mostly good people allowing evil. The politician never goes up on stage and says, "I'm going to take all your money with violence." They're going to say, "I'm going to take your like I'm not they're not even going to say they're going to take your money. They're going to say, "We're going to pass this law and it's going to do this." And so they're only going to talk about the good things. They're going to leave out all the bad things. And they're going to make it sound good and they're going to learn how to speak to you in such a way that will convince you and therefore manipulate you into literally promoting violence without you knowing about it. So basically, good people are allowing evil, and that's the root cause to evil is good people. It's crazy how that works, isn't it? It's not bad people in the
Gosh
world. There's
darn.
actually a lot of good people. It's just that they're deceived and misguided by the evil people. And that's why psychopaths are considered like, these evil geniuses. Well, it's like it's kind of genius, but it's also like we're just ignorant ourselves, right? Like we are just turning off our brains. So that's why knowledge is power. When you give people the ability to say, hey, you're in charge and you have the resources to self-govern and you can do all this stuff, you can just think for yourself. That's it, really. That breaks open everything. Then it's over, right? You're empowering the individual. And that's the last thing a collectivist system wants you to do. When I say collectivist, I don't mean like people can't come together, again, voluntarily, absolutely. I mean, collectivism is the idea that you should justify the violation of the individual for the greater good.
Right.
That's
We
what
see
I
that
mean.
in movies all the time, right?
Hmm.
Harming the one, or I just watched the DC Suicide Squad,
Yeah.
where, Amanda Waller is like this covert operative, and she has no qualms about, killing the people that just helped her set all the stuff up because they don't have that level of clearance, just to save the world from the aliens, and I'm like, dude, you're like more violent than the aliens.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
And that's another thing too, is like the Taoists were saying, hey, we're using too much force. We want people to be good, but by passing laws and trying to make people good, we're actually making them evil.
yeah,
And that's like the dynamic they saw that a lot of the other writers at the time were just like, what do you mean? Like, we need to make people good. They were just like, no, it's just going to go the opposite direction. The remedy is worse than the disease. And we see that
yeah.
with medicine, right? We
We
give a
see that
pill,
a
the
lot
pill
with medicine.
causes problems and more than the actual disease that the pill was supposed to prevent. So when I see these types of correlations, how can I not get into this as somebody from a health background? You see what I mean?
Says I tried to share my hospital coworkers that we do immoral things all the time, and it was shocking how many people didn't realize the things we do. Often I knew what I was doing wrong and did it anyway. Leslie, did you want to
Hmm.
expand on that? What you meant by that?
Well, I think it's similar that I was able to observe, like what Cory said, that I was able to observe. We're told that we are critical thinkers, and we're told that we follow ethics, and then we're told to do something that's not ethical, but because we're also told to follow direction, like we follow the direction and we forget about the ethics, but we believe that we're following ethics. And
Yes.
I mean, I could see it, and there was times that I was like, well, this is wrong, but I will say I'm a recovering addict from following authority. So even though I have, started forest schools and decentralized systems and things like that, I still have this addiction to the authority. But anyway, in the hospital setting, I could see the two. I mean, I knew I was following the direction and ignoring this. And when I would verbalize that to coworkers, they're like, well, if you're doing something immoral, you shouldn't. I'm like, but you were just there with me doing that immoral thing. Like, didn't you know? Like, how do you not
Yeah.
know? So I was
Hmm.
just literally shocked that people didn't know.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and
Um,
by the way, Cory, Leslie actually got arrested
wow.
in Canada, and had court stuff because she was best friends with the woman Kristen she was talking about, who actually went to court and was fined $150,000 for those freedom rallies that she did. Right, Leslie, if I got that right.
Well, yes and no. There's little pieces. I mean, I was summoned to court, and then I spent 2 years in the court system. And the charges are quite. There's so many cases that Kristen Nagel is under, so it's not like there's one particular one where they actually were sued. Where they lost really big. I mean, she's been charged multiple times, but the biggest lawsuit that they actually lost was, they actually attempted to sue I don't remember
Oh, the
which
news agency,
the
right?
news network. Yes. And then they decided, because they didn't sue the first news network that slandered them and told things that were lies, that they then lost the lawsuit. And so they lost actually over $300,000 that
Wow.
she did have to pay personally. Yeah.
Wow.
Um, but
Yeah.
she's totally in alignment with you, Cory, and standing in the vibration of finding a place of love for
Yeah.
yourself and looking at what you can actually do. So she's actually left like the Canadian frontline nurses because they continued to want to do the battle and the fighting. And she said,
Yeah.
I'm completely done with that. And
Yeah.
I'm
It's
looking at how
stressful.
I can move my family forward. So it's
Yeah.
really cool. So I'm super excited, like listening to you and
Yeah,
like,
it's stressful, man. I mean, I talk to people, right, who are politicians, and I know they're going to be the last to understand what I'm talking about because they identify with that, right, directly, and they've already invested so much time and energy into it. Same thing, like if you go to any political content creator online, do you think they're going to be the ones to understand what I'm saying? No, because they invested their whole life into that. So why would they just let it off? Like to them,
They just have
that
to
is
ruin
who
their
they
life.
are.
I mean,
Exactly.
yeah.
Their whole identity, what they see as value. They
Same thing with
perceive,
medical doctors,
yeah, they
right?
perceive who they are as valuable, and that's just the only thing that gives them purpose in life
Mm,
is what they've had and what they've garnered, and people know them for that. So for them to just uproot that, they'd feel like, man, I'd be abandoning everything I've been doing for all my life.
yeah.
So those are the last people we're going to convince. And those are, I mean, I'm not going to like say there's no faith for them to heal because I don't say that as a practitioner. I don't like when people say Hillary Clinton or all these people in power are evil and they're never going to learn, they have no conscience because I don't know who they are. And when we say that, we make it more hard for them to heal. We just make it like, oh, it's impossible. We basically are saying
We're
they're never
creating
going
a
to heal.
reality where it's impossible.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Exactly. So I don't ever say that about anybody. And I know there's this one comment says religion is a panacea. I don't know.
Panacea, yeah.
Pennies. I don't know that word. For the masses, as each of us awakens to our true identity, while at the same time it provides a setup for an us versus them mindset, right? So like religion could be used in two different ways.
Mhm.
And like this is why I think people use the word spirituality. People are starting to see past the confines of these different terms. Like collectivism, like I said, had a good way and a bad way of looking at it. Even communism, like it comes from the word community, right? So people assume it's evil because of all the things in history and what it's been doing and how it's supposed to be perceived. But if it's just communityism, is it actually that bad, right? Same thing with like socialism, if it's just social interaction, or capitalism, if it's just labor and like working for your money. But see, we complicate these notions and then we have preconceived biases of like, well, it means this and this and this and this and this and this. And then we like make a whole thing, a whole book about it. And it's like, okay, well, now it's not just what it says it is. And so
Mhm.
we do this to ourselves and we basically create battles. Like we just do it by complicating everything so much and confusing everybody and putting ourselves in these boxes, as I like to say. We're constantly putting ourselves in boxes the minute we're like identifying and attaching to this stuff. Um, so yeah, I absolutely can see like where religion could be useful, like in the case of the abolitionist, right? Where they say, hey, this is a higher authority than man. Or in the case where it could be really harmful, where they say, okay, the religion is as long as it goes by the whims of government and government says it's okay, then I'll practice my religion. Because that's a lot of people now. I mean, a lot of the religions are 501c3s too, and that's also most of the Christian churches are 501c3s, which is owned by the Vatican. So like they don't even know that the Catholic Church owns their Christian church. But like aside from that, you know,
I
they
did not know
just
that.
yeah, aside from that, it's these other things that matter because to me, I can say all these facts about history and people and events, but I can't really prove that because I wasn't there and I
Mm,
don't really know what happened. Like everybody likes to use that and say, "Well, you're intelligent if you know all that stuff." Like I don't try to use that as my argument. I want to use things as my argument that I know are universal, timeless, that you can resonate with me on, that you can understand. Like that's where I want to base my argument. I call that natural fact, by the way, in my philosophy. I've developed my own philosophy on understanding nature. And so like natural fact would be the things that are universal and timeless. But anyways, that's aside the point. Follow the money. Yeah, money is a tool, right? It could be used for good or bad. Technology, tool, could be used for
yep.
good or bad. If we don't see the reality behind it, that's when it becomes dangerous, at least in my view. Okay, so like we see that we're using technology right now. It's where we see that this is reality where it becomes a problem because there's a reality beyond this that we need to see. If we don't see that, then we're basically in the definition of an illusion. Illusion is something that imitates what is, but isn't actually what is. And my book, Government is Unnatural, Anarchy is Natural, goes into that very concept. It's very direct. It's probably my most direct work. Okay, so like this is not necessarily for the beginner reader, but it could be for some of you guys who are like coming from the more natural or nature-based background. Because I'm basically saying that government is replacing the role of nature or God directly by claiming its authority. Because
Yeah.
once it claims the authority of nature, it can do anything to you. It can take over your body, it can control your health, it can control the economy, it can control everything. And that's exactly what has happened in society, is it's like the pinnacle of power.
Mm.
Um, that's at least one of my observations and why I wrote about it. Another one of my smaller books like that one is Radical Honesty. Because if everybody was just honest about what they truly believed, like the politician who goes up on stage and says they want to take your money or they want to, violently coerce others, if they were honest about it rather than using euphemisms and using all these fancy terminology, then people would be less likely to support them. And if people were honest about what they actually believed, rather than trying to fit themselves into an identity or attachment and try to find their honest self, they wouldn't be trying to look for all those identities and attachments. So
Mm.
those are two separate works of mine that are smaller. And then my Tao book is like a bigger one that's more for beginner readers. Um, how does someone overcome the addiction to having decisions made by authority? I find many people don't trust themselves and would rather someone else decide for them. Now, see, notice the second part of this comment, right? I find many people don't trust themselves and would rather someone else decide for them. They want somebody to decide something for them. It's voluntary. Not every listen, I'm not telling you have to go off grid. You have to make everything happen in society. You have to be totally outside the system and do everything yourself. Like that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm saying you can follow other people as much as you want, but don't make other people follow against their own will, right? So that's what I mean by voluntary interaction. And that's all this is, right? Is getting over the addiction to, well, being contradictive with our own morals, an addiction with realizing, shoot, we've just been lying to ourselves and we haven't realized it. So again, the same way, like in medicine, we tell ourselves, man, well, I gotta take what the doctor tells me because he's a doctor, he's the expert, he must know, and all that. And then there's going to be people who recognize, wait, the doctor is not all that good, and so I should doctor myself. But there's still going to be people out there who say, man, I don't want to doctor myself. I understand that the doctor's not really serving me, but I still want someone else to help me. So they still go to a natural practitioner. See, it's a voluntary relationship. They're not taking charge of their health as much as the other person, but they aren't coercing anybody against their will. And so
Mm.
that's like the key, right? Is there's always going to be products and services for people, supply and demand. If there's a demand, there's going to be a supply. Very basic, right? If people want roads, a flat surface to drive on, it's not very difficult. People will get that going. And you don't need a monopoly on that service because, like I said, the systems we have now create a monopoly for these different services to where there's only one post office, for example, the US Post Office. In the 1800s, an abolitionist named Lysander Spooner set up his own post office, and he got shut down by the US government because they want to have a monopoly on postal services.
Oh,
Now, he was
wow.
even a lawyer. He knew his stuff. He's like, I'm not breaking any laws. But even then, because they have order followers who employ violence, they get done what they want to get done. And that's another thing the assemblies and people who talk about that don't understand is that when you have this belief system, statism, it doesn't matter what you claim to be true about the paperwork and the legalese. If you have people willing to shut down their conscience, they're going to do anything. Violence will get done anything. Might is right in
Mm.
their book, okay? They
Right.
don't they don't care about what is right. And care is that principle we say is like the eighth lost principle, hermetic principle, right? Because if you don't care about something, it won't get done. So even the people who are psychopaths who control this world, they care about ruling over us, and that's why they're so successful about it. And all the people like us who don't care about creating a better world, that's why we don't or don't have a better world. It's all about care, and that's why some people say that's better than love, because what you care about is what you put your attention to. And people can care about things that aren't so, lovey-dovey. People can care about things that are evil, and it will still get manifested. So care sometimes can be seen as like this greater principle.
That's interesting because a lot of spiritual healer type people say, well, I don't care about the money. You've heard that, right?
Hmm.
Well, here's the thing is like if there was a loved one and you didn't care about them, do you think they'd be hanging around? And we wonder why they're completely poor and sick because they're poor and sick, and it goes on and on and on and on. And I was one of them. I didn't care about the money. So I didn't care to learn how to do a business properly. I didn't care to, follow the, what was happening. I was just
Yeah.
doing whatever just to get by because I just wanted to focus on the client or the patient. That's all I wanted,
Yeah.
that's all I cared about. And I couldn't pay my rent. I couldn't pay my mortgage. I couldn't,
Yes.
because I didn't care about the money.
Yes. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like I care about everybody and everything, and that's why I can learn from every perspective. And I learn from Christians and Buddhists and Taoists, and I don't close myself off to one, even though truthfully I can understand the Taoist point of view more than any of the others because it's looking at a lot of these deeper psychological foundations. I still want to learn from all the others. You know what I mean? I still care about what other people believe because what if I'm not them? I don't know what they believe. I want to learn, you know?
Yeah.
So why am I going into that interaction assuming what I think they know when I'm not them? And that's what we do very easily in the truth community is like we think we know what other people know. We don't know where they're at in their life. Maybe there's some traumas they have to face. They're going through a bunch of things. Maybe, it could be a whole bunch of reasons. And that's why I don't like to judge people either and make all these expectations because um, you don't know, right? Our life is also infinitely complex, and it's so easy to say it's this or that, but like I'm not claiming to have the answers. I said that in the beginning here. It's like I'm just one among you. And that's the thing. When government goes in power and says, well, we have the answers and this is how we should do things for everything, they're basically claiming that like they know this reality and they don't. And the reason why it doesn't last is because it isn't timeless and it's based on opinion, right? So it's very interesting because it's that idea of we do know and trust us. Because we know how to perfect society. And then every time it happens, it just goes the other direction.
Mm.
Democide is known as death by government. It's the number one cause of unnatural death. So anybody who says that
Really?
anarchy is chaos, think again, because the number one cause of death is death by government. Um, Professor Rummel says there's over like 300 million deaths in just the 21st century alone, and that's not even counting over 200 million wars between that time, in addition to like the 50 million, 100, whatever, going beyond that. And then there was another statistic I came across from a religious author, which had a lot of professors, and they came about 600 million through
Oh
all of
my
the
gosh.
deaths done by religion. And the number one religion that caused the most amount of death was Christianity, not Islam, or not a lot of these other ones. And it's probably because it's more popular. I'm not sure. But either way, those religions can't cause that much violence unless they have a system of violence or authority to do that violence. Okay. So religion practiced non-violently would not cause that many deaths. Okay. It's when you start
Mm.
saying, well, we believe what we believe, and you're the infidel, and you need to be crusaded and jihaded off the face of the earth
Yeah,
because
that's
you
how
need
I
to be
became an
converted.
atheist, Corey, originally because my ex-husband, when we were dating in university, he told me, he didn't have all these stats, but he just said, do you realize the Christian Crusades killed a lot of people? I didn't know because they didn't tell us that in
Yeah.
church, in Catholic church, right? And so I
Yeah.
was so like shocked and he's like, I don't understand why how you can be religious, with all the bloodshed, Catholicism,
Yeah.
right? And it was so shocking I became atheist. It wasn't until I got sick that I reconnected with spirit. But
Hmm.
we have one last question, then we got to go. What do you think would be the answer to doing something for the greater good? Is there ever a reason to do anything for the greater good if it denies the individual divine sovereign beingness?
So in truth, I don't think, I mean, so there's many different ways to look at this concept of the greater good, right? When I say the greater good, I mean the individual being violated for the collective. It's like a collectivist ideal that has been used by people like Hitler and Stalin throughout history to say, well, if we do this, if we throw these people in a camp, well, then the rest of society will get better. If we pass this law, then society will get better. If we just do this temporary, this violence, that's guaranteed, and then we'll get a possible result that is good. And that's the thing is that people want to prevent possible problems. Like they say, well, what if somebody steals something from me? What if something happens? Well,
What if
it's
aliens come
possible,
down and yeah,
but they want to prevent the possibility with a guaranteed harm.
yeah.
So when somebody says, I want my money being taken from me to fund this or that for like the possible benefit, they're guaranteeing that theft is happening annually, continually guaranteed. So like it's just insane to me because it's like you're literally giving permission for people to do evil
Mm.
and you're guaranteeing it. So when people want to say, well, what about this and what about that and what about this, they're only bringing up hypotheticals and possibilities, and that then justifies you creating a guarantee of evil. Like, where do you
Yeah.
expect that to bring you? Any evil is going to create more evil. It's just going to aggregate. So that's what I mean by greater good. But if you want to look at it through another context, because there's like two other ways I can think of to look at this, it's like the good is now. I don't want to like look in the future because I think that can be a problem. So that's one of the ways to look at it.
Mm.
Another way to look at it is, well, technically we are looking at the greater good from this point of view if we want a better world. So like we have to be biased to an extent because that's just naturally who we are. To say that what I'm saying right now, I wouldn't be saying this if I didn't think there was a better future to be attained. So technically everybody's making a greater good justification.
Mm.
But yes, the first case scenario what I use, the greater good justification, is a particular thing where the individual is getting violated. Um, is there ever a reason to do anything for the greater good if it denies the individual? If it denies the individual, I mean, that goes against the golden rule, does it not? Like, doesn't respect individual rights. Like, and see, when the Communist Manifesto and all that stuff was happening in the 1940s, they were making that everything about society and collectives. Like, you don't have individual rights. You don't
Right.
own your
Right.
property. It belongs to everybody because it's unfair if somebody has too much property, they have to give some of it to some other people. And they made these types of weird justifications, which even in their own communities, they disagreed with among each other. And that just shows you, by the way, that we need to live in a voluntary world. The fact that nobody can agree on anything, like everybody has their own way of looking at the world, just tells you like we need to live voluntarily. Because there was a guy named Mikhail Bakunin in the 1840s, um, who was a friend of Karl Marx, who invented communism. And not a lot of people know about him, but he was warning Marx. He was like, "Hey, I understand what you're trying to do. Like, he's just a philosopher. He's like, he thought he had good intentions. Karl Marx, like anyone else who ends up creating evil, they have good intentions going in. He's like, I understand what you're trying to do is good, but it's not going to create what you think it's going to create. Like, according to Marx, what's going to happen is communism will take over and everybody will start being fair and equal. If we give everybody money and everybody is secure and everybody has their basic needs met, the government will dissolve itself. That was Karl Marx's view. It's like power will naturally just rid of itself because no one will be fighting over scarcity and resources. Everybody will have what they need to maintain themselves. So there'll be no need for competition. And so it sounds really good to a lot of people. Like, yeah, that makes sense. But like back then, I was like, no, that doesn't make any sense. He's like, you're basically giving this more power to the state by doing that. Because you're saying in order to redistribute all the resources, in order to make everybody equal per se, you need to use violence to take from people in order to give to other people. So Bakunin was like, this is just allowing the state to grow bigger. And that's exactly what happened. He predicted what happened to communism. And he was known as an anarchist. And, you know, he was a pretty radical figure at the time because he was directly involved with a lot of different like ways of trying to free people. And Karl Marx kicked him out at some of the philosophy meetings. There was this big First International where a lot of people come together, like the working class, which is like what he appealed to, and he didn't allow Bakunin to speak. He actually kicked him out. He's like, Bakunin's trying to set up his own little group and he's trying to like overthrow us, so we're not going to let him be here. So there was this big thing against Bakunin because he was starting his own little like group of people that was like, wait, this is just not going to work, even though they
Yeah.
were against the systems just as much as they were, right?
This keeps getting repeated, right?
Yes.
Like some of the, we call them cults now. Some of the cults are creating assemblies and things like that. Well, somebody questions the authority at the top and says, wait a second.
Yes.
This isn't making sense. Okay. I don't really think we should do it this way, right? And
Yes.
then it's like, you're out. You're out. They were never part of us and da 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 da, and don't ever say anything negative about the leader. And I'm
Yep.
like, what happened here? This person is out, they disappeared, and I'm really confused. Right?
Yes,
But I thought
exactly.
you guys were on the same team.
Yep.
So yeah, this is just keeps repeating itself.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Leo
we do
Tolstoy
have.
understood this. I don't know if you guys know who Leo Tolstoy is. He was known as
Hmm.
like one of the greatest writers of all time and to a lot of people, but like in Russia, he was very popular and he was also an anarchist. People like Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings, he was also an anarchist. He said it in his own writings. And the whole story about Lord of the Rings, the Ring of Power, it's literally what it's called. Anybody who holds that ring of power, even the nicest of people, become corrupted by it. He
Yeah,
was using that ring of power quite literally as the symbolism of the state. And like the freest people on earth, which were the hobbits who had no government in the Shire, were the only ones who can destroy the ring. And even them got corrupted by the ring at the end of the movie. So I did a whole presentation on that series as well. And I'm not paraphrasing, like he said he's an anarchist in his own words in his journal, because he said no man he sees is fit to rule over a fellow man. And all the word anarchy means, if you break it down from Greek, which if you look it up online, you're not going to get this, of course, because they want you to associate freedom with chaos and
right.
order with
Oh,
slavery.
that's what my mom says. Look at this newsreel. This is what freedom is. And then there's like all these people crashing into stores and stealing stuff. I'm like, oh my
Yeah,
God.
and the people who use the word anarchist to rebel and protest, they don't even know what the word means, and it
Right,
usually just makes it look bad because there was a lot of philosophical anarchists throughout history, like Tolstoy and Tolkien, who and like Josiah Warren, who don't look like anarchists at all. They don't have bandanas. They look like normal people who are just business people, and they just want to be free. And all it means in Greek is anarchon, no rulers. That's it. Doesn't mean no rules. Doesn't mean that there's going to be
oh, and
chaos.
Archon.
Yep. So think of monarchon, like monarchy, one
Right.
ruler. Instead,
Yep.
anarchy, it just means no ruler.
No ruler.
That's it. And so imagine how much that has been skewed throughout history, right? Just that simple word. And that's why I
Yeah.
usually like to use the word voluntarism or like I said, voluntary free world. That's been kind of the word that the communities that I'm in use now to share these ideas because it's not only less, you know, abrasive to people, but it's also more direct about what it is, right? We just want to create a voluntary world.
I like that voluntary world. Yeah, it's much less triggering than communism or anarchy or
Yes.
anything like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, we do have to go. We're over time here, but everyone stayed on, which is amazing. Cory, it's been delightful to have you here. We really, really enjoyed what you've shared.